I'm a top 500 Marvel Rivals player in both Season 0 and Season 1, so today I'll be going over the most common mistakes I see in each rank and how you can fix them. These are going to be focused around the core gameplay mistakes that players in these ranks make, and while it's impossible to go over every mistake someone might make, I believe fixing these ones are core to improving and climbing out of these ranks. I'll also be including a few examples from my own gameplay, that way you can better apply these concepts in practice. So first up, we have Bronze, and for anyone stuck in Bronze, the main issue is that you probably just aren't playing the game enough. Bronze is where you're going to be learning all the fundamentals about how the game plays. Especially if you've never played a hero shooter before, it can be kind of overwhelming. There's a bunch of different roles, there's different heroes. So your time in Bronze is mainly going to be spent learning all of these different things, what abilities do, what different heroes do, how to play each role. And really, there's no way around it. You just have to play the game more. And really, you should be playing the game with intention. And what I mean by that is to just go into each game trying to learn something. For example, be ready to take mental notes about what a hero does if you're playing against them for the first time. Or if you're playing a hero yourself for the first time, think about how you can use their abilities and what they do. To sum all this up, Bronze players, really all you need to do is just play the game a little bit more. You're going to learn all those small little things like what each hero does and how each map plays, and that's going to stick with you for the rest of the time that you're playing this game. So moving on to silver rank players, and at this point in your rank, you should be having pretty decent knowledge of what each individual hero does and how each map plays, but you still probably die too much. So you need to start thinking about why and how you died in different situations. Now, there are obviously a ton of different reasons that this could be happening, but just as a general rule of thumb, most people in this rank are dying a lot because they don't know how to position correctly. Positioning is incredibly nuanced, but the most simple way to think about it, especially in a lower rank when you're first learning the concept, is to just make sure you're playing near cover. Before I go into why should you play near cover, let's talk about what cover even is. Cover is any part of the map that ideally doesn't break, that you can hide behind if you are in danger or low HP, if you need to wait for cooldown so you can re-engage on the enemy, or if you need to reload, because doing any of those things out in the open makes you an easy pick for the enemy team. Now, there are situations where you can get away with not playing cover, but you should still always have an idea in your mind of where the nearest cover is and how you can get to it if you need to fall back because you're under a lot of pressure. One thing to keep in mind is that shields from a tank are not reliable cover because they can break or go down at any time, and you're going to be left sitting in the open completely unprepared. I promise you that if you start actively thinking about using cover in your games, you will die significantly less. For an example of good positioning and good use of cover, look at this clip from one of my games where I'm playing Adam Warlock. I positioned myself completely around the bus and the cart throughout this entire fight. I'm able to safely get off heals to all my teammates that need it, and I'm still even able to find opportunities to do damage myself. And throughout this entire fight, I take pretty much zero damage because the enemies are completely focused on my teammates who are in the open and fighting, and they aren't even wasting time trying to shoot me as I move back and forth around cover. And because of this, we're able to easily win the team fight. The second mistake I see a lot of silver players make is not using their abilities enough. Your cooldowns and abilities are what is going to put a lot of pressure onto the enemy team and force them to respond in some way, whether it's by making them use their own cooldowns to save themselves, using their cooldowns to save their teammates, or just being forced to completely back out of a fight. Let's use Luna Snow as an example. Her Absolute Zero is a 12-second cooldown. Absolute Zero freezes enemies for 2.5 seconds. So that means 5 times every minute of the game, you have an opportunity to look to free someone on the enemy team for 2.5 seconds. You could use it on a tank, that way they can't keep walking forward and taking space. Or you can hold it to use it on a diver who's pressuring you and your other support. Think about how you want to use your cooldowns, but most of all, make sure you are just using them in general. There are far too many times I'll see someone in this rank die with something like the Absolute Zero up to a Black Panther that's diving them when you could easily have attempted to freeze them. And if you hit it, not only are you going to save your life, you'll also be able to turn around and find a pick on that Panther, or maybe you'll force a cooldown from their tank or support to save them. And the whole point here is that if you aren't using your cooldowns enough, you're going to miss out on all of those opportunities. And of course, you always want to make sure you're using your abilities with a purpose, but in this rank, it's much better to just use them, figure out why it didn't work the way you wanted, and fix that mistake for next time, than to just hold them and never use them at all. Get into the habit of using your cooldowns. Everything I just said also applies to the next most common mistake, which is not using your ultimate abilities enough. You build your ults really fast in Marvel Rivals. You get one about every minute to 2 minutes. That means every 1 to 2 minutes, you're going to have an opportunity to try and create an advantage for your team. So stop waiting for the perfect opportunity to use your ult and force the enemy to respond in some way and create an advantage for yourself. Be proactive with your ultimates. Again, don't just waste it, have a plan in mind, but it's much better to use it and try to create that advantage than to hold it for too long and never attempt to create any advantage. And finally, the last mistake for silver players I wanted to go over is something really simple, and that is stop turning your back to the enemies when you're running away. When you turn your back to the enemies, all it does is delay the inevitable. Instead, what you should do is apply as much pressure back as possible through your cooldowns and your primary fire. Even if you end up dying anyway, there's a chance that it opens up an opportunity for your teammate to trade you, or there's even a chance that it puts so much pressure onto the enemy that they don't want to commit and die themselves, so they end up backing off and you save your own life. Again, really simple, but way too common, especially in the lower ranks, but all throughout every rank in this game. Before I move on to gold, if you're enjoying this video or finding it helpful, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it really does help me out. And if you're interested in watching some high elo Marvel Rivals gameplay live, I do stream every day over at twitch.tv/brush. So moving on to gold players. The first mistake I want to talk about here is not understanding your role or your hero. Understanding the goals and objective of the hero or role you're on is crucial to understanding how to get value in that role or on that hero. You don't want to be running into the front line as a Rocket Raccoon, and you also don't want to just be shooting tanks when you're playing someone like Psylocke. So to quickly sum up all three roles, vanguards take and hold space. Your job is to be the first line of defense for your squishy teammates behind you, and you need to prevent the enemies from just being able to walk into the backline. The more space you hold, the more resources the enemy has to use to take that space and get to the objective. Duelists should be applying constant pressure, and you want to try and find picks for yourself or create other openings for your team. For example, if you are playing Psylocke, you dive the backline and you force Loki to use his runes. Well, now there's an opening for your other duelist to find that pick for themselves, or there's an opening to target and pressure their front line now because they don't have the immortality. And finally, strategists alleviate and mitigate pressure from your team by staying alive and healing whoever needs it, or by finding opportunities to put out damage back. And that's a very common misconception you're going to be seeing, especially in this rank, is that people think that supports shouldn't do damage. But you have supports like Jeff and Mantis who do crazy amounts of damage, and they have good utility and survivability for themselves and for their teammates. And again, if you want to climb out of gold, you need to understand all of the roles, at the very least, this very fundamental level. This is going to help you find what you need to do to create value for yourself and for your teammates to win the game. The second biggest mistake you're going to be seeing here in gold is you probably stagger way too often. Staggering is when you or your teammates are dying one by one. You need to avoid this at all costs because it means you're going to be permanently down at a numbers disadvantage for as long as your teammates or you continue to stagger. Have you ever had one of those games where the enemy team just breezes through all 3 points and they have 3 or 4 minutes left at the end? Chances are it's because you never took an even or advantaged fight and you were staggering the entire time. So if you notice yourself dying over and over again without your team being nearby or just even walking back from spawn, make sure you give it a second, regroup, and give you and your team an opportunity to take an actual 6v6 engagement. And finally, the last mistake I want to go over for gold players is to stop wasting your abilities. And I know that probably sounds contradicting considering what I talked about earlier, in that a lot of players need to use their abilities more. But at this point, you should be used to looking for opportunities to use your cooldowns. Now you just need to make sure you're actively thinking about what opening or advantage using your cooldown can create for you in that situation. When you waste a long cooldown and you get no value from it, it creates a huge opportunity for the other team to capitalize on and pressure you back, either through picks or just by forcing you out of a fight. Mistakes can happen where you accidentally use an ability at a bad time, but when you catch yourself doing it, you gotta think about it and try and correct it. So moving on to platinum. Platinum players should have a pretty good idea of what the fundamentals of the game are, and you need to keep improving upon those. These are things like positioning or not staggering, making sure you're using your ultimate and abilities. And that's just a general idea to keep in mind, is that as you continue to climb the ranks, if you want to keep climbing, you do need to keep improving upon those things and take them to a higher level. Minimize those mistakes in those areas especially, and figure out what you need to personally do to improve them. That being said, there still are a couple of mistakes for Platinum players specifically that I wanted to point out. The first thing I wanted to talk about is bad target priority. So you should have an idea of what your job is on whichever role or hero you're playing, but taking it one step further, we need to maximize that value if you want to keep climbing. So bad target priority in terms of doing damage and trying to find picks means do not just shoot the tank in the front line when the supports are just keeping them up and the DPS are hitting you or your backline for free. And all this does is gives the enemy supports faster ult charge. What you need to do is find the targets that are in a position to where you can pick them off, meaning either they're literally out of position and too far up or too far away from their team to get help, or they're someone who's already really low, or they have no cooldowns. These are the targets you should be going for, and not just on the tank who's just cycling his abilities to mitigate damage while getting pocketed by two supports. And even if you're a support player, you need to think about target priority too with your healing. Don't just spend all your time focusing on healing your tank in the front line if the support and DPS right next to you are in immediate danger of dying. Your tank is going to be okay if he doesn't get healed for a few seconds when he has both of his abilities up and he's only missing 20% of his HP. Prioritize keeping your other support alive and your DPS alive before worrying about the tanks. And I'm not saying to just neglect your tanks in the front line either. This is all super situational, but try and use good judgment and prioritize healing on the people who need it most. Another huge mistake I see in this rank is people wasting their ultimates in fights that are already won or already lost. You need to start being able to recognize when fights are won and lost to avoid using more resources than you need to. Ult economy is incredibly important for keeping momentum going into the round, and when you use an ult in a fight where it's already secured, for example in a 5v2, all it does is speed up the fight, and the worst case scenario is that it doesn't speed it up at all, and now you still don't have your ult for the next fight. And in the same way, in a losing fight, you don't want to be using your ult in a 2v6 because the odds of you turning a fight in such a disadvantaged situation are incredibly low, and even if you do find a kill or two, you're still going to be disadvantaged going into the next fight, and you still probably lose that one anyway. Here's an example from one of my games where after we win a fight and the enemy team has to reset and they're all waiting to respawn, the enemy Hela just randomly ults in a 1v6 for no reason. And not only does it get no value and it instantly falls back to the ground, but she is forced to be bailed out by her teammates who have to use a mag bubble to save her. She has to use her bird to reposition, and the mantis has to ult to save her as well. And the last mistake I wanted to mention for plat players is you probably stay in the same position for too long. You need to know when to rotate, because the longer you spend at a spot, the less value it's going to get. The enemies are going to adjust their positions to relieve some of that pressure, and the worst case scenario is that you become a really easy target for the enemy team to make a play on you. Especially if you're consistently playing on off angles, I don't recommend you stay in one spot for more than a few seconds. Moving on to Diamond. And if you want to climb out of Diamond, you need to start learning how to capitalize on enemy mistakes. And that's the first mistake I wanted to talk about here, is not being proactive enough. You need to be the one looking out for opportunities to make plays, whether it's through your ultimate or through cooldowns, to help you capitalize on enemy mistakes like bad positioning or bad ability usage. So look for those opportunities to use your Mantis sleep aggressively and find a pick on the backline or on a tank. Or if you're playing someone like Panther, look for the opportunities where you see the support use their cooldowns and now you know you can dive that Luna for free. These are the types of plays you need to be making, and being proactive and in a proactive mindset is the only way you're going to be seeing as many of these as possible. If you're sitting on point waiting for the enemy team to make a move, you're going to miss out on a ton of opportunities. Mistake number 2 is engaging at the wrong time. This could be too early or too late. When you engage too early, especially as someone like a duelist who dives, the only thing that's going to happen is the entire enemy team is going to turn to you and you're going to instantly fall. So what you need to do is make sure you're engaging as your team is creating pressure and an opening for you to make your play without being the focus from the enemy team. And the same goes for engaging too late. If you wait too long to engage and let's say your tank has already died in the front line, the same thing happens. The enemy has no one to worry about in front of them, so now they're going to turn to you or the next easiest target for them to pick off. Your goal should be to engage at the same time as the rest of your team. Here's an example of good engagement timing from one of my games where I'm playing Jeff. So I start behind the enemy team, I see them all running up main, but I don't just instantly start shooting them in the back as soon as I see them. I let them get close enough to main where my teammates are the ones taking the first contact, which then allows me to get off multiple shots for free and start chunking out the enemies immediately while also being under no threat. This gets me a really easy pick and we win the team fight very easily. And the last mistake I wanted to mention here is not understanding your win condition. So for example, let's say your team has 2 duelist alts going into the next fight and the enemy team has a Luna Snow ult. So we know our win condition here is getting value through one of our duelist alts. But to do that, we need to force the enemy Luna to use their ult first. So what you can do is use one of the duelist alts. When Luna Snow ults, you then kite back, wait it out, and then after the Luna ult, you can re-engage with the second duelist ult, and that is your win condition. So the whole point here is identifying that win condition and figuring out what you need to do to get there. Learning how to do this at a basic level is crucial to climbing the ranks because sometimes the answers aren't going to be so obvious, but the more you look to identify your win condition and figure out how to get there, the easier it's going to be when that path gets a little bit more complicated. So moving on to Grandmaster, and if you want to climb out of Grandmaster, this is where you need to start taking things above and beyond the standard level of game knowledge and mechanics. And the first mistake that's related to that is not gathering enough information. And what this means in practice is that you need to be aware of every single opportunity the enemies are giving you and pushing it as far as possible. So you need to be keeping track of enemy cooldowns. If an enemy uses a cooldown that makes them vulnerable and an easy pick, you need to capitalize on it. Or you need to be tracking ults and keep an idea of what your ult economy is looking like and what their ult economy is looking like. You need to recognize when you have an advantage in numbers or positioning or when an enemy is out of position. And all these little things add up to finding those moments where you can find a pick and steamroll a 6v5 or a 6v4 fight, or even just being able to find a pick and keep it an even fight. That way you don't completely get rolled and waste time trying to reset. These small little things add up over the course of the game, so you need to make sure that you're always being aware of what's going on in the game, what your teammates are doing, what the enemies are doing, and trying to capitalize on this information as much as possible. Grandmaster right now is about the top 4 or 5% of the Marvel Rivals player base, and that's where the second mistake comes in, which is having too big of an ego. You need to remind yourself that you are not the perfect player, and your teammates aren't perfect players either. So if you make a mistake, you need to accept it, don't blame other people, just figure out what you did wrong and how you can fix it for next time, and stop worrying about whatever mistakes your teammates might be making. It's just going to distract you from your own improvement. Another big mistake Grandmaster players make is having a weak hero pool. What I mean by this is being able to only play 1 or 2 heroes at a GM level. If you want to climb out of GM, you need to be proficient at multiple heroes that are within multiple roles, because otherwise you're going to run into games where your teammates fill up on your role, or they take your hero, or your hero gets banned, and then you're going to be completely screwed, or you're going to screw over your team by locking in a 4th DPS or a 5th DPS or a 3rd tank. Not saying it's impossible to win with a weird team comp, but it's definitely a lot harder. So what I recommend is just having 3 or 4 backup heroes throughout multiple roles, with at least 2 of them being ones that you can play at a high level. That way you always have a backup plan. And the last thing I want to say for trying to climb out of Grandmaster is you need to stop tilt queuing and mindlessly playing. At this high of a rank, everyone is assumed to be pretty highly skilled. So when you're mindlessly queuing and not actively thinking about your mistakes, about what you can do to improve or fix them and avoid them in the future, all you're going to do is put yourself in a loop where you're just playing games over and over again, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but ultimately you will stagnate if you just mindlessly queue up a ton of games. I recommend playing just a couple hours a day when you're feeling the best. That way you can actively think about what you want to improve on and focus on not having as many mistakes. A few hours of optimal gameplay where you're actively trying to improve is going to be more valuable in the long run than just playing 20 games a day. Moving on to Celestial, and if you are in Celestial, the idea is kind of similar to Grandmaster. You really need to start making sure that you are min-maxing every single opportunity that the game is presenting to you. And that leads me to mistake number 1, which is not capitalizing on every single mistake the enemy makes. If you notice that the enemy Loki, for example, wastes his lamps, jump on him. Or if you notice that the Panther misses his spear dash combo and he has no escape, punish him. These are the small little things you need to be looking for to create opportunities and advantages for yourself at this rank. And this leads me to mistake number 2 for Celestial players, and that is not creating opportunities for yourself and for your team to reach your win condition. So we already talked about identifying your win condition, but now you really need to be thinking about how you're going to reach it. For example, if you know your Star-Lord ult is your win condition, how do you get value out of that Star-Lord ult? Well, let's say you're playing against a Loki and a Luna who has her ultimate. So we need to force Luna to use her ult somehow, and we need to force Loki to use his lamps. Now we can do this a few ways. We can either force it ourselves by hard pressuring them and diving them, or we can ask our team to coordinate an ult. For example, if you have another duelist or a tank, they can ult first and force a response in that way. Or if you have another duelist who's being really active, maybe they can force it for you and then you can ult after. Again, these are small little decisions that you need to plan for and make to take every little inch that the enemy can give you and reach that win condition. And the last mistake I want to mention for Celestial players is just in general not planning ahead. You need to start thinking of this as a strategy game. What utility and resources does the enemy team have that you need to be aware of and be ready to respond to? Think about the enemy's win condition. How are they going to reach it? What do they need to do to you, and how can you play around it? You need to think about things like ult economy going into future fights. Even if you won the last fight, what did you have to use to get there, and what did the enemy team preserve and that they're now going to have for this upcoming fight? All of these things you need to be thinking about and planning ahead for, that way you're not caught off guard by a surprise play. And finally, we are in Eternity. And if you're in Eternity, you already know all of these things. You know you need to min-max, and you probably have pretty insane game sense and mechanics compared to the average player. But if you want to get to one above all and be one of the best 500 players in the world, you need to fix the mistake of not watching your own replays. You need to start breaking down your own gameplay minute by minute and looking at what each individual small or even big mistake you might be doing that is preventing you from winning games. How are the enemies capitalizing off of these mistakes, and how can you mitigate it in the future? At this high of a level, it's going to be super individual, and the best way to keep improving from here is to just watch your own replays and figure out what you're doing wrong. And the last thing I can really mention for Eternity players is to just make sure you're staying on top of the meta. Pros and the highest tier of players in One Above All will always be using new tech and finding which heroes and comps are the best in the current meta. Watch pro matches, watch pro player streams, and just other really high level players to analyze what they're doing that you can also implement into your own gameplay. So those are the most common mistakes I see in each rank in Marvel Rivals. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. These videos take me a long time to make. Also, I just wanted to mention my Twitch again. If you guys want to watch some high level gameplay live, I do stream every single day over at twitch.tv/brush. Thank you all so much for watching, and good luck with your climb.